Pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. I want to begin by saying this beautiful piece is courtesy of Margaret, of course. I was lamenting loudly that I went to the craft stores to try and come up with the necklace for this, and I was just very frustrated trying to find the pieces, and that's all I had to say. A couple of days later, she arrived with this done. And you'll get a chance after to see it. It's absolutely stunning. We are part of this great story, of this evolving universe, connected to a 14 billion-year-old history. And all humanity, every single one of us, with the ability to both co-create the present and the future. The question is, will we do this co-creation by domination over the planet, or by taking responsibility for the well-being of the planet and all living things? In response to this question, the reading from Proverbs that Anne just read is, in my opinion, brilliant. It tells us that to embrace true wisdom, a wisdom rooted in understanding, a wisdom rooted in otherness, a wisdom rooted in compassion, is to experience God. It tells us that to become fully human means to turn towards and to call forth the wisdom of God that is already present within us and among us and embedded in all of creation. The voice of wisdom in Proverbs, that voice crying in the streets, says that we humans turn away from God's wisdom too often to attend to our own wants at the expense of others. And so I want to share this parable with you from Peter Rollin's delightful little book called The Orthodox Heretic. There was once a mighty emperor who had known only victory and prosperity during his entire life. Such was his success in battle and his absolute power over his subjects that many considered him divine. The emperor ruled with an iron fist from a majestic palace built high up in the mountains, a vantage point from which he could survey his vast kingdom. Over time, he had built up the largest army the world had ever known, an army before which every single nation trembled. Yet his thirst for power was unquenchable. He longed for an ever stronger army and continued to oppress and torment his land and his people with impossible demands for absolute obedience. Yet one night, this great leader had a terrifying dream. In this dream, he witnessed his vast army laid waste and his great palace in ruins. Then he heard a divine voice saying, "There is a heavenly power at work in your empire that can bring your whole army to its knees, a power that transcends your earthly reign." The emperor awoke and said to himself, "I must see this divine power for myself." So he turned to the great religious leaders of his land, visiting their vast cathedrals and diligently engaging in all their elaborate rituals. He offered great sacrifices at the altar of the various gods and promised untold treasure to the religious authorities if they could reveal this divine power to him. However, no matter how hard he tried and no matter what rituals and incantations the religious authorities engaged in, the emperor felt no divine presence and witnessed no mighty acts. So he turned inward Seeking this divine power through private meditation, fasting, and prayer, he spent long hours practicing new forms of asceticism, prolonged periods in isolation, and every form of prayer he could discover. However, despite these great sacrifices, the emperor felt and saw nothing. Then one morning, he overheard two of his servants discussing religious matters. As he listened, he heard them speak of a great mystic who lived in the city. This man was believed to be so close to God that he could uproot trees and part seas with a mere gesture. As the emperor listened, he heard this great man of God had contracted a terminal disease during his work in the poorer parts of the city. He was approaching death and had only days to live. The emperor viewed this overheard conversation as a sign that God had finally answered his prayer, and so immediately he called together an entourage of soldiers and servants, demanding that he be brought to the dying man's bedside without delay. Within an hour they left the palace, and while the journey was long, they reached the city gates by nightfall. After some searching, they found the humble dwelling of the old teacher, and the emperor boldly entered. While the emperor rarely spoke directly to anyone other than his most trusted advisors, on this occasion he looked directly at the dying man and said, "I have been told that you walk close to God. I am here because I have heard of this God's power and wish to bear witness to it." "Is that so?" replied the mystic. "I must warn you that the power of my God is unlike anything you have encountered before. If you truly seek it out, it will break you into pieces and destroy your reign over this land." "So be it," said the emperor. "If what you say is true, then fate has spoken." The mystic nodded, and then, with the last of his strength, beckoned the emperor to approach him. The emperor complied, and in response, the old man reached up, grabbed him by his fine robes, pulled him down to his knees, and whispered into his ear, "Here is the power of my God. It is to be found in my rotting flesh, in my weakness, in the dirt and disease of this world. You have not seen this power because it is in the people you have refused to heed. It resides in those you have tortured and put to death, those who have suffered under your hand. The power of God is to be found in the face of the widow and the orphan, in the refugee, and in the outstretched hand of the starving child. This weakness and fragility is the power of God, a power that can overturn the most evil of tyrants." These were the last words of the teacher, for there and then he died in the arms of the emperor. The emperor remained silent for some time, clutching the dead man's body. He looked around the humble dwelling and saw the poverty of the people who had stayed by this man's bedside throughout his suffering. And he began to weep. We are being called by the wisdom of God crying in the streets to take stock of our own political, economic, and religious emperors, and at the same time to take stock of our own personal tendencies to be emperors in our own way. For too much of our history, God has been seen as the ultimate emperor, made to be loving by some of us, but remaining in control and in judgment of all things. This has continued to be the primary understanding of God, even though 2,000 years ago, Jesus, the human incarnation of the wisdom that was named in Proverbs, introduces a different way of approaching God. Not as a violent, judgmental power imposed from above, but rather as a powerless presence entering our world from below. Jesus and the wisdom of God cries out from the center of the catastrophic humanitarian crisis with now more than 60 million refugees worldwide. Jesus and the wisdom of God cries out from the catastrophic environmental crisis as we now find ourselves in the midst of the Earth's sixth massive extinction of species in our 14 billion year old history, an extinction that rivals the dinosaur extinction and is almost entirely the result of human activity. Where, oh where, is the wisdom of God in all of this? This is why, my friends, I believe so strongly in our need to embrace this great story. Not just as a fantastic or a fascinating scientific tale, but more profoundly as the way to help us human ones understand our place in the story. The incredible gift of consciousness that lets us know we are alive, and the sobering reality that we need to live in the universe responsibly. The great story has the possibility of transforming our lives when we open to the great and deep wisdom that has been present since even before the universe came into existence. The very presence of the ultimate reality, the Spirit of God. It is a wisdom that far exceeds our little human wisdom. It is a wisdom that is a gift for us to embrace. The discovery of the wisdom of God is not a new thing. It is there in Proverbs from 3,000 years ago. It is there in the very life of Jesus 2,000 years ago. It is there in Paul's letter to the church at Corinth when he says, "The foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the wisdom of God is stronger than human strength." When we embrace the great story of creation, our story, for we are not separate from it, but an intimate part of it, we encounter the wisdom of God and recognize that the Spirit of God is present, not out there watching, but in every single moment of life, in every creature, in every raindrop and sunflower, in every mountain and every ocean, in every star, in every galaxy, and most intimately in every single human being. Through our 2.5 million year history as a species. How can we not see that domination can never be the way of God, the way of the universe, but only compassionate and responsible cooperation? Peter Rollins, who provided the parable, says, "Suddenly we are confronted with the idea that God is not encountered in the highest being in the chain of beings, the chain of life, but rather God is encountered in the lowest and the most humble of things." I want to share this poem by Mary Oliver, who speaks, it seems to me, out of the deep wisdom of God. She says, "What is there beyond knowing that keeps calling to me? I can't turn in any direction, but it's there. I don't mean the leaves' grip and shine, or even the thrush's silk song, but the far-off fires, for example, of the stars. Heaven's slowly turning theater of light. Or the wind, playful with its breath. Or time that's always rushing forward or standing still in the same, what shall I say, moment. What I know I could put into a pack as if it were bread and cheese and carry it on one shoulder. Important and honorable, but so small. While everything else continues, unexplained and unexplainable. How wonderful it is to follow a thought quietly to its logical end. I have done this a few times. But mostly, I just stand in the dark field, in the middle of the world, breathing in and out. Life so far doesn't have any other name but breath and light, wind and rain. If there's a temple, I haven't found it yet. I simply go on drifting in the heaven of the grass and the weeds. May we open to our own breath and light, our own weaknesses and frailties, and there encounter the still, small voice of the God Spirit, that ultimate reality, until we too become the voice of wisdom crying out.